Say that word right there between my fingers. It's a hard word.
It is a hard word.
You don't know? Or you do know? You don't know. Okay. Let's see here. Beside the teenagers, I think you're the oldest here. Maybe not. Do you know how to say that word? Omniscient.
Close.
Close. Probably never even heard this word. Unless you were in Sunday school for a long time. What? Omniscient. Pretty close. Omniscient. Omniscient. Now, that part there, S-C-I-E-N, if we put C-E after it, that would be the word science. And science is knowledge. Right? We go to science class, we find out knowledge about everything in the world. Well, we don't find out everything in the world in one science class. But science is knowledge. Okay? So that's knowledge. And Omni is not just a place we visit over in Cherville. Right? Do you guys, is the Omni over there? Not anymore? It must be something else. Okay. Omni means all. So, all knowing. Knowledge. All knowledge. And that's what our verse says, right? God knows that E-T-H, we say S these days. God knows all things. Right? So, when we say God is omniscient, we also are saying God knows everything. God knows everything. Now today we're going to tell a story and learn a little bit about what God knows from the story of from the beginning of the story of this person right here. And I heard somebody comment that you always know who this person is because she has bracelets on. Actually, Mr. Isaac and Miss Katie's dad or mom said the kids always said we know who this is because she has bracelets on. So I don't think the word is on here. It's in here really small. Does anybody know who this person is? From going to church before and seeing, listening, hearing stories?
Is she a queen?
I will tell you that the story is about her, and she has a name, she has a book in the Bible named after her. So, how many ladies have books of the Bible named after them?
2.
I know there's 2. I'm thinking really fast. Cody, you think there's 2? You are, like, make sure you check everything with Cody. Okay, so let's just say both of them, or one each of them. What's one of them? A lady who's got Esther, and who's the other one? Ruth. Ruth and Esther. We learned about Ruth about a year ago, maybe, remember? And so now we're going to learn about Esther. How many know the story of Esther? You've probably seen it or heard it somewhere. Esther was her name in Persia, but she was a Jewish girl, and her Jewish name was Hadassah. Have you ever heard of the story of Hadassah? I'm really surprised if you haven't. Okay, maybe not. Maybe it's been, I'm an old guy. Maybe it's been a while. Now, I don't know, I've not seen the movie, but I know that like Disney or somebody made a big movie about parts of this story. And I don't know, Disney doesn't always get the story right. But we're going to start telling you about this girl. Her name was Esther. No.
I never saw it.
Okay, no, we'll just talk about this one. So, here is the Persian Empire. Okay? And we can see this area right here. That's Jerusalem, right? This little red dot here, that's Babylon. What's the connection between Babylon and Jerusalem? People that did live in Jerusalem got carried away captive, right? To Babylon. And after they were carried away captive, it wasn't like they were kept in chains and did slave labor all their life. They just weren't allowed to go back to Jerusalem. And so after a while, they started building houses, and they lived there in Babylon. They moved around, and there was actually a lot of Jewish people who moved all the way over here to Susa, or Shushan. And you might remember, or you might not, after Babylon was conquered, they were conquered by the Persians. And so now we're in the time, in history, this really happened. This is not just a story. In history, when the Persian Empire ruled the world, and the king of Persia ruled all the way from India. You older kids, think about how far away that is. If you thought about your geography, this is today's Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, all the way from India, all the way across into Egypt and down to Ethiopia. And all the way over here to Turkey, but he did not rule over Greece. He did not rule over Greece. Now, sometime before the king in this story reigned, one of his predecessors, King Cyrus, told the children of Israel that lived in this area that if they wanted to, they could go back to Jerusalem. Do you remember that? We talked about that about 4 weeks ago. Do you remember the name of the man who led a bunch of people back to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple? His name started with a Z.
Zach.
Not Zach.
Zach.
Huh? Zebra? Well, it had a B in it and it had a Z. Zerubbabel. That's right. Zerubbabel. So King Cyrus, that's the name of the man that led about 50,000 people back to Jerusalem. And so then, but some people stayed, right? And God allowed them to get important positions. Some of them had important positions in the government. Some of them had large homes, and they were wealthy, and they gave money to help them. And so, after Cyrus and another king, there became the king we're going to talk about. His name was Ahasuerus. We might not need to remember that. But Ahasuerus is the king of Persia, and he is king, emperor, from this part all the way over to this part. You would think that would be enough, right? That's pretty a lot. But you know what he wanted? He wanted Greece. Greece, for some reason, the country of Greece, He thought, I need to conquer Greece. I need to be able to control Greece. And so he got this big plan to bring together a huge army. Huge army. I believe that he got together 1 million soldiers. 1 million soldiers. That is a lot of soldiers. And before he got all those soldiers together, he wanted to get all the nobles of the land of his kingdom, all the important people, and he brought them to a big feast. He wanted to impress them. He wanted to show them how powerful he was, how rich he was, and that he was thinking, if they will see that, then they will want to help me become even more powerful because I will bestow gifts on them. And so he had a huge feast. A huge feast. The big banners were out. The musicians were there. The seats that they sat on were made of gold and silver. They had the best. People were walking around with trays with drinks on them. They were walking around with trays with sweets on them. They were walking around with trays with snacks on them. And that was just the people walking around. What was on the table was so much. And believe it or not, the Bible says this, so we know it's true. It seems like crazy, long amount of time. But if the Bible says it, it's true. They had this feast for 180 days. That is half a year. Could you imagine being at a party where you had the best food and the best drinks and just relax and the most cool music and everything for 180 days? He must have been a very wealthy king, right? And so he's trying to impress all of these people. And then, after 180 days had passed, he had one final huge week of party where it was more than just the officers and the nobles and the governors of all the land. He had everybody, all the men in the whole city, come in to his huge courtyard, and they drank and ate and listened to music and partied for a whole week. Now, at the end of that week, the king, he'd been drinking a lot. The Bible says he was well drunk. And he got this idea in his head. He said, you know what? To one of his servants, he said, go tell my beautiful queen Vashti to come over here and show her beauty off to all the men here. Now, he was drunk. He probably didn't think very good, but he's the king. And if the king says to do something, you pretty much do it, right? Well, when Queen Vashti heard that, she was like, I'm the queen. I don't just show my beauty off to everyone. I'm his queen. Why does he want me to just parade in front of all of these other people, even the common men of the city? Now, all this time, she had been putting on a great feast for all the ladies. But she said, I'm not doing that. And so she sent a message. She sent the messenger back to King Ahasuerus. No. Would you want to be that guy? Have to go back to the king and say, she said no. Well, at least he wasn't hurt, right? Well, when Ahasuerus heard that, he got angry. He got angry. And I don't know. After a while, he might have come to his senses. But you know who knew that the queen said no to the king? Everybody. And whether the king was saying something that was really kind of foolish or not, since the queen said no to the king, she was making it popular or possible for all the wives in the whole kingdom to disregard and disobey their husbands. Which is not a good thing. The way God created man, the way God created husbands and wives is that he made the husband in charge. The wife is not a slave or anything like that, but he tells wives to reverence their husbands. And so that's the way God created a home. As a man is in charge, the wife helps the man, and the mom and dad, the dad and mom, rear the children. So, these were Persians. They were not Bible believers. But they got one thing right, is that it would be the end of the kingdom if all the wives decided they wouldn't do what their husbands told them to do. And so, King Ahasuerus, with his wise men, got together and said, we can't let this go just pass with no words being said about it. And so they wrote a law, and they said that since Queen Vashti had said no, that she would no longer be queen. Now, she wasn't killed or anything like that. In fact, I think that the king realized that he did a dumb thing, and so he didn't punish her with death. But she was no longer queen, and she would no longer live in a palace, and so King Ahasuerus does not have a queen now, and they sent out a law to all 127 provinces that this was so that all the people would know that wives must still obey their husbands. Well, they had that big feast, and after the feast was over, and it was about over, after the crazy event with Queen Vashti saying no, what did they have to do? They had to get that army together, and they marched their 1 million soldiers from there. They gathered them, 1 million people. Maybe some of them were cooks, some of them watched the animals, the horses and the camels, and some of them were fighters. Maybe there was 1 million fighters and plus more, but they marched and they gathered people from all over the kingdom. They marched all the way over here to fight against Greece, and they lost. They lost. With 1 million soldiers, they lost. The Greeks fought for their homeland, and they repelled the invaders, and they were not conquered. And so Ahasuerus had to come back, and was he now the ruler over Greece? No, because he lost. He came back. Do you think he was happy when he came back? He was still king of 127 provinces, but he was kind of like moping around. And maybe one day he was thinking, man, I wish I could just spend some time with my queen. But he didn't have a queen, did he? He didn't have a queen. And so his advisors and his helpers said, we've got to help King Ahasuerus out. He's just moping around all the time. He needs a queen. And so they came to the king and they said, King, this is what we think we should do. We should search through all 127 provinces for the most beautiful women in the land. How many of you have ever heard of a beauty pageant? Yeah. Did you know there's a beauty pageant in the Bible? It might have been like the beauty pageants we know about today. I don't know, because it was in Persia like 3,000 years ago, 2,500 years ago. But these men said, we need to go just find the most beautiful women in the whole land and bring them to the palace, and then let them come before you, and you can pick from the most beautiful, most lovely ladies in the land, and you can pick one to be your queen. And the king said, that is a good idea. I sure miss my queen. I need a queen. And so they went through the land. They found all, I don't know how many, but at least 100, probably at least one from each province, maybe more. And these were all girls who had not been married before or anything like that, because they wouldn't want somebody to take a woman from her husband to be the king's queen. So they found all these girls. Maybe some of them were like, maybe I will get to be the queen. But I'll bet some of them were like, I like it here, I don't want to. But the guy said, you're pretty, you're going to see whether or not you're going to be the queen. I don't know. I don't know how they felt. But I think some went and didn't want it, went even though they didn't want to, and others were probably thinking, I'm going to make myself the most beautiful. I'm going to be the queen of the whole land. Well, there was a young lady who lived in the city where the king was. In Susa is what they call it now. In the Bible it's called Shushan. And she lived there, and God had prepared her especially for this time. She was and she entered, let's say, she entered the contest. There were certain things about her that made her different from all the other ladies, all the other girls that were in this contest. One of the things that made her different is that she was a Jewish girl. She was a Jew. Now, why was she a Jew living in Shushan? Why was she living here? Her parents or her grandparents had been carried away captive, right? Now, she wasn't a slave, because obviously she wasn't a slave because she could enter this contest. But not anymore. She wasn't a slave, but she was over here, not in her homeland. So she was a Jewish girl. You want to know something else about her that was different? Both of her parents were dead. Both of her parents were dead. And so but she wasn't like homeless. She had a cousin who was older than her, old enough to be her dad. Like her dad's brother's son was older. And he, when she lost her parents, her cousin, her older cousin, brought her into his house and cared for her like his own daughter. And his name was Mordecai. So Mordecai. We're going to learn more about him next week, I think. Yeah, we'll learn some more about him next week. But Mordecai is like Esther's father. He loved her like a daughter. She respected him like a father. And so her father is really her older cousin. Her parents are dead. She is a Jewish girl. And she's beautiful. Now, who made her beautiful? God made her beautiful. That's right. Who allowed her parents to die? God. We learned all about that last week, right? In the last 4 weeks. God is always in complete control of everything, everywhere. He knew this. Who allowed her to be born in Shushan? God. And God knew all this about her. God knew this, and so somehow, probably Mordecai said, you ought to see if you can be entered into this contest. But do not tell anyone who your relatives are. Do not tell anyone that you are a Jewish girl. Okay? So, that was kind of her secret. Now, there seems to be that there's a reason he told her that, is that there was some people that still hated Jewish people. They hated Jewish people. I don't know exactly all the circumstances or why, but we know from certain things that were going along, and even just this, that Mordecai said, don't tell anybody you're Jewish. That some people hated Jewish people. But so Esther entered the contest, Hadassah entered the contest, and for a year they stayed in this big complex with rooms all over the place, and there they prepared themselves to meet the king. Now, there's a couple of reasons why they waited for a whole year, but one was to make sure that they actually were, they had never been with a man, that they wouldn't bear a child while they were like, I've been pure, and I've been, never been married, and then the king, he didn't want anybody that had been messing around. So, but there they put the perfumes on, and they took their spas and their baths, and they just took care of themselves. I bet they exercised and did everything that they could so they could, when the time came, be the most beautiful version of themselves for the king. And different ones finally got their turns, and they came before the king, and they dressed up and did everything they could. And then the day came when it was Hadassah, or when it was Esther's turn. And Esther, when Esther came, she was a humble, nice girl. It seems like that very much. And because the chief man who was in charge of all this process, he noticed Esther. She stuck out. She stuck out probably because she was pretty, but also because she wasn't, I don't know, what's the word? You know, people who are, guys could be this way too, but since we're talking about girls who are pretty and they know it, and they're like, what's the word? They're proud, they're arrogant, you don't want to be around them. That was not Esther. Esther was pretty, and she probably knew it, but she was humble. And the chief man, the guy in charge of this process, gave her the best room in that part of the palace to live in, and gave her 7 maids to take care of her and to help her. Well, when the time came, she could have just gotten whatever outfit was in the place, but she went and asked the guy in charge, what do you think I should wear? And she came out, and the indication is that it was kind of simple, not as gaudy as everyone else. I don't know. But the time came for her to come before the king, and when she went before the king, I think that he asked her some questions, because he was a king. He was not just, he had a brain in his head. He wanted more than just a pretty face. He wanted somebody that could cheer him up, right? Somebody with a pretty face who's an ugly person isn't going to cheer you up, right? Especially after losing to the Greeks, right? So, I think he talked with her some, and he decided that Esther would be the next queen. He placed a crown on her head. He said, the contest is over. I found the one that I want to be my queen. And Esther became the king's queen, his wife and his queen. They made another big feast. I don't think this one was 6 months long, but they made a big feast. They said that the search is over, and Esther became the queen. All this time, Esther had a secret, though, right? What was Esther's secret? Where she's from, what her home people is, that she's a Jew. So, she has that secret. Does God know that secret?
Yes.
He knows that. Does God know, God knows everything about us. God made Esther this way on purpose. And I just can't tell you. If you want to know the rest of the story, you can go into your own Bible and read the book of Esther, and then you'll know ahead of time. But God made Esther this way, and God knew everything about her. And God has made you too. God's made you too. Has God given you some talent? God has given you something that you are different from everyone else. And God, we're going to see how God, in particular, used Esther's beauty for a special purpose. But God knows everything about all of us. And He's made us a certain way. And He wants us to use the way He's made us for Him. What could you do for God with the way He's made you? Just think about that. Some of you are younger, and as you grow older and learn more things, you'll find out more that you can do. But God has made you so that you could do something for Him. But you can't do anything for Him if you're going your own way. If you're not humble and you're not obedient, and you do your own thing, God can't use you, and you can't do anything good for God. Esther was the queen. But you know who she still listened to? She listened to the king. But who else was in her life? Who was like her dad?
God.
No, who was the man that became like her dad? We said his name? Mordecai. And who told her not to tell anyone about her being a Jew? Mordecai. Did she obey her dad, who wasn't even her dad? She did. She was humble. She didn't say, well, I'm the queen now. I can do what I want. Did she? Sometimes we do that. We're not the queen, but we say, well, I'm this, so I can do what I want. That's not the type of person that God can use for anything special. And everything God uses us for is special. We don't have to be a queen or a king in order to do something special for God. If God wants us to do it, it's special. So, there's lots more coming. Next week, we're going to find out about some trouble. Do you think God knows about the trouble? Do you think God knew about the trouble even before it came?
Yes.
He did. That's why he got Esther to be the queen. So you have to think, there's some type of trouble that's coming that Esther is going to be able to do something about because she's the queen. We're going to have to see next week. Maybe she's going to have to let her secret out. Maybe not.